Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the BIOFIN teams around the world. Welcome to this webinar on engaging with foundations for biodiversity finance. I'm just going to very briefly explain you the concept of our webinars. What we really want to deliver with our webinars is we know that countries around the world are working on analyzing the existing finance solutions, but also working on their biodiversity finance plans to see what are the most optimal, what are the most suitable finance solutions that they could include in their finance plan. Now, one important finance solution in many countries is foundations, working with foundations or philanthropy. And we are working together with our private sector support center that's also based in Istanbul to bring you some information on how we could engage with foundations, and also what is the current level of importance given to biodiversity among foundations. So we're going to have a presentation by my colleague Carolina Mzik from the center, and after the presentation we're going to have some time for discussion. So if you have any question, you should check the icon that looks like a hand. And you can press that, and we know that you have a question, and at the end, in the question and answer session, we're going to get back to you. And once we start the discussions, it will be interesting to know from countries what are their experiences in engaging with foundations, with philanthropy, what have been the problems. So please think about that and be ready to share at the end of the presentation. So without much further ado, I'm going to go over to Carolina now, and over to you for the start of your presentation.
Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Ono. And my name is Carolina Mzik. I work in UNDP in the private sector and foundations team, also located in Istanbul, but we are part of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support. And I think we all have the same boss, Nick Sekran. We are, in my team, private sector and foundations, we are actually working on few corporate projects which engage both businesses and philanthropy in sustainable development goals. And today I will be talking to you about an initiative that I am leading, which is called the SDGs Philanthropy Platform, which is a partnership initiative between UNDP, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and the Foundation Center. And it's funded by external funders, philanthropies such as Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, the MasterCard, Hilton Foundation, Al Walid Philanthropies. But what's really most interesting is to show you how we engage with foundations in countries where we work. And some of these countries where we work overlap with where BIOFIN is located, which is Colombia, Indonesia, Zambia. So I think this will be very interesting for you. But before that, I will also share with you sort of an outline of how UNDP generally as an organization works with foundations. And so let me start with the first slide. And a few years ago, before we started the project, we did a very thorough mapping and research about what is generally UNDP or UN relationship with foundations. And essentially, we came up with a very strong conclusion that this was very much transactions-based. And it was not very fortunate because the research shows that philanthropy is more than just the money and the grants which they are offering. It is a very diverse sector around the world. It includes obviously very large foundations such as those that you probably know very well, like Bill and Melinda Gates foundations and others, as well as many community foundations and many corporate local foundations in countries where it works. So it's really difficult to put philanthropy or define philanthropy as sector as such. But the other things, the other interesting information that we saw is that philanthropy it really offers a very broad range of assets that us in UNDP are traditionally not very well connected with. foundations are very well connected in countries. Both. They are very well connected with NGOs or with community foundations, a target audience that we as UNDP have very limited access to. And they are also very well connected with very wealthy and dynamic people in countries, both from government as well as from business. They have a lot of development expertise, and they often are working, especially those who are grant makers, they are working with integrating different types of sectors or dimensions or spheres in the country, because they give grants to a very broad, multiple portfolios of platforms. So essentially what we saw is that philanthropy is a sector that not only UNDP doesn't really know very well, but we also don't really know we don't really have very good relationships with them. We don't have networks, or we don't really know who the partners are. Regarding funds, the US foundations are really the only foundations around the world, with maybe exception of the UK and perhaps German foundations, that really give a lot of grants. And they also are foundations which are very well documented. So you might remember I told you we're working with the Foundation Center, which is like a US-based think tank that gives or provides a service which is called Foundations Data Online, information or clearinghouse about what US foundations around the world are doing, how much grants they are giving to whom and where. And using this source, we found out that, for example, foundations from the US alone give $51 billion about per year, and they have about 670 billion of assets. That's a lot of money. If we compare, European foundations have about the same amount of assets, 600 or about billion euros, but they give about half. So they give about $25 billion a year in grants. Foundations, according to our partners, will contribute about $360 billion to Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. That's the kind of estimates that we have calculated together with our partners. But probably more interesting aspect is that philanthropy is very innovative, and they are sector which has been supporting and piloting these new forms of financing, which right now actually are reaching the mainstream financing, such as impact investing and venture philanthropy. As I mentioned before, the ways of working of governments and the UN is very different from foundations, whereas we, for example, obviously our strategies are very much based on the national development plans, and in UNDP we obviously have the executive board. Foundation strategies change from year to year, but they are very much driven by the passions of their funders. So the interests or the grant making of a foundation is very much linked to what are specific personal interests of the funders or the main grant makers. The other issue that we also found is that in countries where we work, philanthropy or foundations in general, grant-making foundations, very often support different types of innovations, very successful innovations which never reach scale. And the reason is that these foundations typically work in silos. If you ask a foundation, with exception maybe of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, have they ever met with UNDP or UN? Have they ever met with resident coordinator? I should say 90% of the kind of surveys we say it's no. They don't know how the UN works. They're typically not very well connected with governments, and they certainly don't know the structure that we in countries are facilitating as the UN, which is the development and aid effectiveness collaboration structure that the UN and government are facilitating with bilateral donors. And finally, what is important is that if UNDP or UN agency works with foundation, it really requires due diligence. So I should say we cannot work with any foundation Many foundations are linked to controversies, and we do need to know what these controversies are, and the decision whether we work with the foundations which is linked with controversy is very much a decision that has to be taken following UNDP protocols on that. As I mentioned, philanthropy is a very dynamic and evolving sector. Traditionally, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you can see that most of the foundations, even though very present today in this landscape, have been these huge grant-making foundations. And I pointed to Ford, to the MasterCard, to Gates Foundations, which Gates Foundations per annum gives away about $2.5 billion. Half of this goes to the US alone. But 10 years later, in 2017, this picture is very, very different. We have a very, very dynamically growing sectors of corporate foundations in emerging countries, especially in countries such as where we work, in Kenya, India, in Colombia. We see that most of these foundations are actually not grant-making but operational, very closely linked to corporations who fund them. And increasingly more, we see that foundations don't want to really just give money away, grants. They want to support initiatives which pay for performance or show performance. So it's anything from grants to impact investing to even debt and equity for projects which have this double bottom line. On the one hand, development results or even financial returns, and on the other hand, very clear social outcomes. So that's sort of the emerging, the right-hand side of the slide, the emerging picture is the one where we want to tap because we believe and we bet that this is the future of philanthropy. So SDG Philanthropy Platform has been launched in 2014 as UNDP initiative that with two initial objectives. One is to connect philanthropy from the countries and globally to sustainable development goals, because we knew that during the MDGs, philanthropy has not been working directly with the framework, and we think this was a huge loss of resources and also of collaboration potential. The other aspect is that philanthropy is not very well known to governments. Typically, if we ask the governments, do they know who philanthropy in countries is and what they do, what are their development objectives and results, we hear from our government counterparties that they typically don't. So on the other hand, we wanted to also pilot approaches where we show to the governments what are the potential collaboration, institutional collaborations mechanisms where they learn a little bit more of what philanthropy in countries is and what is their collective development potential and impact as a sector. And so currently we work in the countries that we've listed here. Again, it's Kenya, Zambia, Ghana in Africa, it is India and Indonesia in Asia, and Colombia in South America. And in these 3 countries, 6 countries, we have 3 main objectives. We do work with local foundations, trying to understand who they are and what they are interested in, what they are currently working on. We are working with the government to try to link the philanthropic data with the national statistical bureaus to understand whether these evidence from these 2 sectors can be linked, including through the big data solutions. And the third one, we are trying to see and facilitate collaboration around themes on the ground. And the kind of results that we are looking at is that we want to drive more social finance that delivers sustainable development goals. We know that SDGs will require all the potential possible capitals and finance to come together, and we just want to make sure that in collaboration that we can bring in all these initiatives and collaborations that currently foundations support into the common sphere that we work in and we facilitate as the UN in countries. we want to reduce duplications and created synergies between what the UN governments do with foundations by having concerted efforts rather than working in silos. We also want to increase the voice of philanthropy and their grantees in the national development plans, which are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. We are working through networked approaches because we think that this is the most relevant and effective way to engage philanthropies. And we are working on two important aspects that are new in SDGs and have been not so prominent during the MDGs. One is innovation. We know that SDGs will require unprecedented level of innovations. Right now, the confidence of reaching these goals is very low unless we really invest in innovations. And we believe, we also see that philanthropy has the appetite for risk-taking, has the appetite to underwrite some of these innovations, which I'll show to you later. And we're trying to figure out how the collaboration can be structured around that. So when we, for example, launch the platform in Colombia or in India or in Zambia, we have done all these three key steps. One is that we've done mapping of foundations in a country. In each country, we've done desk research to understand who are foundations across the board, corporate, high net worth individuals, private foundations, trust. So all this sphere that belongs into charity or philanthropy. And we came up with very interesting data, very innovative, that show that, for example, Kenya has more than 300 foundations, corporate foundations, and half of them is working on education, for example. We found more than 300 foundations in Colombia. We found much less foundations in Zambia. It was about 40, just because of the development level of Zambia. But at the same time, obviously, we linked these foundations. We also found out who are the US or European foundations working funding in Zambia. So first is to map who your partners potentially are. Second is understand what are their key interest areas and their passions and where do they have energy. And the third is to try to figure out what are the kind of networks or institutions where they are involved with and how does it link up with what we as UNDP are working on. The second big step is to engage them into dialogue on Sustainable Development Goals. And here, obviously, again, in all these countries where we work, governments have already been involved in working on institutional arrangements on how to coordinate implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. So let's say, for example, in Colombia, the government has a committee on a collaboration on implementation of the SDGs. We, as UNDP, have been linked up with this work, and we have been working with the committee and their group to see how philanthropy can be involved. Because traditionally, the government has been very keen and knows how to involve business networks, but they typically don't really see philanthropy as one. And similarly in Kenya, and in a very similar fashion in Indonesia. So working, for example, with the Ministry of Collaboration and SDG Implementation, BAPENAS, we have engaged with them to see whether they would be interesting and involve philanthropy in their conversations as well. And finally, we are looking into this multi-stakeholder collaboration on selected themes. So, for example, in Kenya, as I mentioned, most of local foundations are working on education, and we are currently looking into working on early childhood education with 60 plus local foundations. In Indonesia, it's natural resource management, and in Colombia, it's obviously peace, sustainable peace. So we are not, but however, in this collaboration, we are not really replicating this kind of typical formula for collaboration, but instead we're looking into where are the kind of catalytic solutions for the SDGs? Where are the kind of accelerators where if you really press or if you invest in a specific theme or issue, you can see that we can engage, we can have dividends, or we can see result across many different SDG goals. And we are looking into different types of research, analysis, facilitation to see, and also catalytic funding support to see where these accelerators lie and how we can actually support them with funding from foundations. And the final one is obviously we're trying to assure that this kind of approach is aligned with what the government wants and is interested in. So now if I give you a few examples, you can see and Google yourself that in Kenya we have done this primer for philanthropists and social investors about how to invest in sustainable development goals. And there we have mapped all the SDG policies, we have mapped all the big actors, government, bilaterals, foundations, businesses who are doing interesting things on SDGs, and then we also mapped out the key interventions. We put a spotlight on education because that's we found that this is the interest of the corporate Kenyan foundations. And for example, you see here, and as I said, this is our database of these local foundations, which actually can be opened also to the BIOFIN, your project. You see that this is Colombia. In Colombia, we have mapped altogether about 250 organizations that we have defined as foundations. Most of them are interested in local development. On the left-hand side here, philanthropy by type, you can see what are the kind of different foundations or philanthropic organizations that we found. So most of them, or majority of them, 54% is actually different types of corporate philanthropy. And then in the middle, you can see what are the kind of themes that they are interested in. So you see that many of them are working on different types of economic empowerment, on skills development, and obviously everything really here is wrapped into this concept of peace building. You can see that most of these organizations that we actually mapped are local organizations. And in Colombia, we work with the local philanthropic association called AFE, that, which is our local partner, and they are an association that for most of these foundations. I also shared with you a similar mapping in Indonesia. Similarly, we found 205 foundations, and you can see what are their philanthropy by type. We have mapped them by theme, you can see who are our local partners. So, for example, I can imagine that immediately after this webinar, I would think that your local team from Indonesia or from Colombia could team up with our coordinators in these countries to exchange information and see if any of these foundations would be specifically interested in biodiversity. As I mentioned to you before, what we're trying to do in Indonesia, we are working with Bappenas, the Ministry of Planning and SDG implementation, to see how philanthropy can be integrated as a partner into this mainstream SDGs implementation. And this was done through an organization called Forum of Philanthropy and Business for the SDGs, and that's an official partner to the government in implementing the goals. And these kind of institutional solutions are very, very important because they really show how philanthropic resources can be actually properly accounted in the national accounting mechanisms when it comes to measuring and logging progress on the SDGs. The kind of program that we collaborate with foundations there is on, for example, on sustainable palm oil initiative. We have with the local foundations such as Tanoto Foundation, Asian Agri Group. So we not only include private philanthropy, but also corporate philanthropy. We include inclusive business ideas, all of them working around the whole concept of how foundations are contributing to natural resource management or improving natural resource management there. And the other aspect that we are also working, for example, with a large foundation, Packard Foundation, is on diversity and ocean management. This is a new initiative, but overall we're trying to, our main key there is to bring in philanthropy to whatever different provinces are doing already on natural resource management and how it links up with the national policies. And again, these are the kind of partners that we have, for example, in Indonesia, and I would be very keen to hear from our Indonesian colleagues today if they know any of these names, if you actually have come across, and if there are any relationships that we can help you with. How does it work in a country? So I think we are very much, we are very similarly organized as you are. We have a consultant who works as somebody called national coordinator in UNDP or UN office, and the person is fully engaged or responsible for developing relations between the UNDP or UN and philanthropy. And as you see here on to the right, these are our partners, this is our influence in Indonesia, and obviously we would be very keen to share it with you once we decide about our common objectives. Finally, what I would like to show you is a cool website that we have done together with the Foundation Center, which is called the SDG Founders, and this database shows how philanthropy foundations are contributing towards the SDGs. So you see that here on the slide, you see this is SDG 15. That's the one that I picked as a goal. And the share of total foundations funding for this goal has been over $5 billion in that during this period, 2010-2013. These are predominantly US foundations, and this is just because I found the biodiversity in SDG 15, but obviously we think that there is much more funding towards biodiversity which is hidden in other goals. But you can see, I will show you in live how this works and how you can find who are the largest funders in the area. I have actually listed them. So again, American foundations, probably known to you: Moore Foundation, Packard Foundation, Walton Family Foundation, Gates Foundation, some European foundations, but I presume that you all know them. The more interesting, obviously, is who are these foundations in countries where you work, because surprisingly to us, the foundations in countries they are also funding a lot. We don't really know how much because they don't share much data, but more than the funding, again, we are very interested to know what is their sphere of influence and see if we develop a relationship, how else can they help us to achieve our goals. So this is just the largest funding. And let me just now go to show you in live how this works. So you can you see something which is called the indicator wizard. Yes, and this tells you how you are aligned with the SDGs if you're a foundation. Let's say I am a foundation and I fund biodiversity. So I say biodiversity here. And it shows me which goals I should be interested in. Goal 15. And relevant targets and indicators. So then we obviously encourage our foundations to not just look at the goals, but what are their specific targets and indicators. So these are those we have mapped most relevant with biodiversity. And then, and this is just, you know, if you get to know your foundations, I think this is just a very easy way to introduce them to use this wizard to introduce them to the SDGs. Now, if you go to goals, let's see, again, life on land, let's see how much money and who are the biggest. I already actually showed it to you. The largest funders here, this is actually for the goal 15, not just for biodiversity. So the top 25 are these funders, most of them American, some of them European. Do you know any of them?
The National Lottery is #1. That's great to see.
Yes, do you have relation? Yeah, you should have relationship with them. Okay, so this is, you can see the distribution of foundation funding by SDG. This is the one we are talking about, which is the SDG Life on 15. It doesn't really receive much funding compared to the other ones, all the other goals. Obviously, the big one is health and education, predominantly because Gates funds it. And this is in relation to the ODA, if ODA is taken into account, not very much either. That is changes in foundations funding, so the goal 15 is actually growing, but not much. That's change in ODA. And to the left, I wanted to show you interesting reports that we that we show on as information publications, which foundations can also tap in.